Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Star Trek Voyager, Season 4, Episodes 8 and 9, a two-parter, The Year of Hell. So as a kid, I loved this two-parter. I thought this was great. Even as I bought the DVD sets and rewatched it, I loved it. As an adult, kind of rewatching it and picking it apart so I could do this video, I liked it a little bit less. I still think it's a good two-parter and I think it's well done, but there's a lot going on. So starting from the very beginning, this is the Year of Hell, and which had been mentioned earlier in the before and after episode where Kes already goes through this and kind of mentions it and brings it up. So already that kind of shows how that timeline is already askew because Kes is no longer on the ship, so that's kind of important. From day one, we start with Janeway doing her opening because they're in the wherever they're at, and she's like, space, the great unknown. I was like, honestly, why didn't you just say the final frontier? You could tell that was kind of the purpose, was to give that illusion to Kirk in the opening sequence, but they did kind of go in a different direction. The Astrometrics Lab, is that where they're at? Anyways, and we see Janeway has a brand new short haircut, so that's kind of interesting. And I like it. I like the longer hair more on her, but I kind of get the short hair. It is what it is. She has integrated some Borg technology with their mapping and stuff like that, and Seven is able to eliminate 5 years off of their battle, or off of their travels, which, seeing as how we're into Season 4, plus Kes threw us 10 years, this eliminates another 5 years, so now it's only a 50-year journey to get home at this point, so it's actually in their lifetime, so that's kind of interesting. Day 4 is where we finally start meeting the new characters like Anorex and the temporal anomaly, where we see that the ship is basically changing time, and the whole premise of this two-parter is Anorex changing time to get back to where it was at one point. So, and you kind of get that at one point he had a wife and he changed time, whether accidentally, on purpose, whatever, and it erased that planet and that timeline, so his wife is no longer alive, and now he's doing all of these mathematical equations to basically put things the way that it used to be. So in day 4 is where they come across this temporal anomaly, and you can watch the wave as it changes the ship in front of them, and then it changes Voyager, and they're being just blown apart, and Janeway's like, this is the week of hell. And it goes from oh, hi, welcome to our space, just kind of get your way through it, to now we're going to blow you up, where the most of the rest of the episode is kind of in. We jump to day 32, so we're in the month of hell, and it's kind of a sad moment where a whole deck is about to explode, and she's like, get out of there, and the doctor actually has to close the door on 2 people that are running behind, so they're not going to make it on time. I loved the scene where B'Elanna and Harry are doing trivia about pop culture references, and he's like, okay, a famous space shuttle, Montana, First Contact, which is a direct reference to the movie First Contact, so that was great. And sure enough, Seven comes and answers the question. The question was what's the name of the ship? And it was the Phoenix. And Seven is like, oh, the Borg were present for that. It's a long story, because the Borg were there. That was the whole premise of the movie First Contact. And so it was just kind of funny that she knew all about it. And it reminded me a little bit of Worf in the Trial and Tribulations episode, where he's like, we don't discuss it with outsiders. So I kind of like that. Day 65, and we see Neelix in a uniform. We find out that Captain Janeway's birthday is May 20th. Tuvok is blind, and there's some really interesting scenes with Seven taking him to the bridge, him having the computer make it a tactile computer board, so instead of just the push button, so he can actually feel it. And Voyager finally creates a temporal shield, so we see Anorex make another choice to eradicate this planet, to kind of make things the way it used to be, but this time Voyager doesn't change. Voyager's stays intact because of their temporal shielding, and they stay ahead of the wavefront. Day 7, again, just Voyager being blown up, and like it almost takes out the entire outer hull. So we see Voyager, how it's just barely hanging on, like it's barely intact. And finally, day 73 is where the first part ends, where they've lost 9 decks and more than half of the entire ship is just gone at this point. So Janeway makes the decision to abandon ship. So overall, it's a very powerful first episode. Like it's really intense. In my opinion, part 2 was less intense because it just kind of wrapped it up in a whole. Like day 180 is a little hardcore because we see Janeway where she has to get to the other side of a room, and she's like talking to Voyager as a ship, and she's like, please be kind. And she like runs through these fires, and you just see how her face is burned off, her arms, like I forgot exactly the percentage of her body that was burned, but the doctor tells her. It being Star Trek, like the next scene, he's basically able to heal most of it, but it is a heartbreaking scene to watch how Janeway has to go through all of these flames just to kind of save the ship. Through most of it, it's Chakotay and Paris just being on board this ship, on Anorex's ship, and finding out more about him and more about like why he's doing this, and eventually like kind of getting away from it, and they end up getting one of the crew member on their side. I didn't really care for Janeway's like cheesy line where she's finally like, you know what, forget all of this, we're just gonna like end everything, and she sets a collision course into Anorex's ship, and she's like, time's up, and it's like, oh yeah, it's a time travel episode, I get it. Did not need the cheesy line. It's almost like Worf in First Contact where he's like, assimilate this. It's like, it's funny, but it's not necessarily needed. And we see Voyager ram the ship, it blows up, Janeway dies for I think the second time in the series, maybe the third at this point. But because the ship is no longer there, it kind of resets everything. So now we see Voyager again re-entering Krenim space, and they're like, hey, you should probably go around this. And Janeway's like, no biggie. And they do. And everybody lives happily ever after. And even Anorex, we see him go back to his wife, and she asks him to do something, and then he does that instead of doing his work. So overall, I think it was a really good two-parter, but the second half started to like drag a little bit. I feel like they could have done a little bit more reworking. For those who have seen this one, go ahead, let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys for everything, and I will see you guys next time for Random Thoughts.